Guys, this story is absolutely wild. A broke designer in a rusty little Fiat fights over the last parking spot with a man driving a Maserati worth more than her entire life. And the crazy part? She has no clue he's one of the most powerful men in Naples. She tells him to back off. He should have been furious. Instead, he becomes obsessed. One parking argument turns into stalking, dinner invitations, private villas, and a relationship that feels less like romance and more like the beginning of total destruction.
The inciting incident occurred when both subjects identified the same object of desire: a vacant parking space in Naples' chaotic Central Rico district. For subject Adriana, this was perceived as a critical victory in a high-stakes environment where parking is a zero-sum game. Her professional viability was contingent on securing this resource. The subject's decision-making was compromised by several stressors: her vehicle's mechanical failure, severe sleep deprivation, and a desperation fueled by caffeine. This psychological state primed her for a disproportionate emotional investment in the outcome. Her acceleration towards the space was a clear desperation maneuver. The conflict was initiated by the arrival of the antagonist, whose black Maserati served as a potent symbol of socioeconomic dominance. The two subjects and their vehicles assumed confrontational positions, establishing a classic territorial standoff. This was the first test of wills. Observation of the antagonist revealed classic indicators of an alpha personality: imposing stature and expensive attire suggesting immense wealth. His initial communication was a non-verbal, dismissive gesture intended to assert dominance and elicit immediate submission from the subject, whom he perceived as a social inferior. The subject responded with a counter gesture, referencing her turn signal as a legitimizing claim, thus refusing to yield. The antagonist's subsequent escalation, exiting his vehicle, indicates a failure of his initial dominance display and a deviation from his expected social script. The antagonist's physical egress from his vehicle was characterized by a fluid confidence, suggestive of an individual accustomed to deference. His imposing stature and flawlessly tailored suit were designed to project an intimidating presence, a physical manifestation of his social power. He advanced on her vehicle with an air of inevitability, anticipating compliance. The subject employed passive resistance, using her vehicle as a barricade. This forced him to initiate physical contact with her domain. A rap on the window with knuckles that suggested a familiarity with violence. A minimal opening of the window initiated the verbal exchange. The antagonist's assertion, "You are in my spot," revealed a profound sense of entitlement. The subject countered with a logic-based rebuttal, citing temporal precedents, her voice deceptively pleasant. A lifted eyebrow indicated the antagonist perceived her defiance as novel rather than threatening. When the subject attempted to physically secure the space, he intervened by placing a hand on her vehicle's hood, a clear boundary violation establishing physical control over her property. His subsequent verbalization, a thinly veiled ultimatum, is characteristic of narcissistic control tactics. The subject's response was a single, defiant negative. This monosyllabic rejection of his authority represented a critical escalation point in the confrontation, uttered without conscious deliberation. The subject's defiance appears to stem from an accumulation of psychosocial stressors, including chronic fatigue and entrepreneurial anxiety. The antagonist became a symbolic representation of the systemic power structures she felt victimized by, triggering a potent act of rebellion. The subject then escalated from passive resistance to actively dictating terms, further subverting the expected power dynamic. Her suggestion that he utilize a public parking garage was a calculated social slight intended to diminish his status and underscore her control of the situation. The antagonist's reaction deviated from a typical anger response. Instead, he exhibited laughter. This suggests a cognitive reframing of the event from a threat into a source of narcissistic supply, a novel and stimulating challenge to his dominance. He then employed a common narcissistic tactic, invoking his identity as a source of power. The subject's response, expressing indifference to his status, constituted a significant narcissistic injury, while simultaneously intensifying his intrigue with her as an atypical subject. He revealed his name, Carlo Ferretti, with the clear expectation that it would elicit submission. Her initial lack of recognition further disrupted his script, confirming her status as an outsider to his sphere of influence and heightening his perception of her as an anomaly. He then enumerated his assets, establishing absolute control over the immediate environment. This information provided the subject with the context for his power. Knowledge of the Ferretti family's reputation for ruthlessness likely induced a state of cognitive dissonance and heightened anxiety. The subject's internal schemas regarding the Ferretti family were activated, associating them with vast wealth and quasi-criminal operations. Carlo Ferretti, in particular, was reputed to be the most formidable of his siblings, combining intellect with a capacity for danger. Despite this new, threatening information, the subject maintained her defiant posture. The antagonist articulated this behavior as a dichotomy of bravery and foolishness, indicating his own analytical shift from confrontation to psychological assessment. He then demonstrated superior observational skills, identifying her professional materials and deducing her purpose. He framed the conflict as a risk-benefit analysis, explicitly questioning her willingness to provoke an individual who holds significant power over her professional environment. Her response, a hyperbolic statement about defying even papal authority, cemented the shift in his emotional state from amusement to genuine interest. The conflict's objective had transformed from acquiring a parking space to understanding the subject herself. He then requested her name, framing the inquiry as a reward for her impressive defiance. He explicitly stated that her resistance to his authority was the source of his fascination, a common pattern for narcissists seeking novel sources of stimulation and challenge. Her name is Adriana Romano. The antagonist then enumerated his options for punitive action, a clear intimidation tactic. However, the subject displayed remarkable emotional acuity, correctly diagnosing his psychological state as one of amusement rather than genuine anger, thereby neutralizing his stated threats. He conceded her observation, validating her assessment of his character. The dialogue shifted into a meta-analysis of their dynamic, with the subject asserting her professionalism in other contexts, contrasting it with her behavior toward men who attempt to intimidate her. He then disengaged physically, only to reassert control through an external action, a brief, ambiguous phone call. This maneuver was designed to wrest back the initiative and introduce an element of uncertainty, thereby creating psychological distress for the subject. His subsequent action, parking his own vehicle illegally, demonstrated a complete disregard for the societal rules at the center of their dispute. His declaration of arrangements served as a vague threat, implying consequences beyond her immediate comprehension. He verbally conceded the physical territory, but asserted his intent to continue the engagement. His statement revealed a fixation on her psychological traits, her stubbornness and determination, identifying these as the source of his continued intrigue. The battle was over, but the campaign had begun. He then issued a directive for a future social engagement, which the subject immediately refused. He dismissed her refusal and stated his intention to thoroughly investigate her personal life, a clear threat of invasive surveillance and a classic precursor to stalking behavior. When the subject correctly identified his behavior as stalking, he immediately reframed it as due diligence. His final assertion was a masterstroke of manipulation, predicting her compliance would stem not from coercion but from her own curiosity, framing her submission as an act of her own volition. The 5-minute conflict induced a profound neurochemical response in the subject, a surge of adrenaline she mistook for vitality. Before she could articulate her defiance, he strategically withdrew, leaving her in a state of physiological arousal with an accelerated heart rate and somatic tremors. The subject experienced acute disorientation, Observing she was 15 minutes late, she attempted to regain professional composure through controlled breathing exercises. She rationalized her autonomy against Carlo Ferretti's declarations, which were designed to strip her of all agency. Her internal monologue displayed classic cognitive dissonance. While planning a defensive strategy, she acknowledged the manipulator was correct, her curiosity was piqued. The state she labeled feeling alive was an addictive response to the high-stakes stimulus he provided. The preceding months were characterized by routine and control, a stable baseline that Carlo Ferretti aimed to disrupt. She compartmentalized the incident, proceeding to her client meeting in a converted palazzo that housed several creative agencies. The client, a hotel group seeking a rebranding, represented 3 months of financial stability. Despite her residual agitated state from the confrontation, the subject successfully focused her cognitive resources, and the meeting concluded better than anticipated. The clients responded positively, promising a decision within the week. The subject experienced guarded optimism, a learned defense mechanism. Upon returning to her vehicle, a text from an unknown number arrived. You were 17 minutes late to your meeting at Romano and Associates. The message continued, analyzing the client's patience as a positive sign. This display of omniscience triggered a vasovagal response. Her accusation of harassment was immediately reframed by the perpetrator as information gathering, a semantic tactic to normalize stalking. He presented privileged financial data, positioning himself as a benefactor. Her demand to cease contact was ignored. He dictated the terms for dinner, revealing knowledge of her address at Via San Gregorio Armeno, which induced chest tightness. The subject correctly surmised his capacity for surveillance. Her texted refusal was met with a definitive assertion of control. Yes, you are. He concluded by framing her as a possession, anything I want to keep. Using her name, Adriana, to establish false intimacy. She blocked the number, her hands trembling, with a mixture of rage and what clinically presents as trauma-induced excitement. She rationalized against contacting authorities, recognizing his actions occupied a legal gray area constituting psychological, not criminal, aggression. His behavior was not technically illegal, merely invasive, and the subject's self-assessment revealed a perverse sense of flattery. This vulnerability stemmed from a previous relationship that concluded 18 months prior, where she had been treated as an afterthought. Carlo Ferretti, despite being arrogant and invasive, did not treat her as disposable. She drove through Naples' chaotic traffic with racing thoughts. Her residence was a small studio on the 4th floor of a walk-up, a self-earned sanctuary in the old city. The apartment was a symbol of her autonomy. That evening, she attempted to suppress intrusive thoughts of Carlo Ferretti by focusing on work. The effort was unsuccessful. Phone notifications triggered a startled response, a state of hypervigilance. At approximately midnight, an unexpected knock induced a freeze response. A delivery for Signorina Romano was announced. A courier presented a large bouquet of wildflowers, chosen for their unpretentious appearance, to disarm her. She denied ordering them. The courier stated they were prepaid. The enclosed card combined a narcissistic compliment with a thinly veiled threat. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., do not make me come get you. Her instinct for self-preservation conflicted with her subsequent actions. She put the flowers in water, attempting to decipher Carlo Ferretti's strategy. The next day, she engaged in displacement activities, work, to avoid the 8 p.m. deadline, resolving to demonstrate non-compliance upon his arrival. Her plan to appear defiant was abandoned. At 7:30, she showered. By 7:45, she was analyzing his dress code. At 7:50, she had complied. Dressed in dark jeans and a silk blouse, her appearance carefully managed. She rationalized her compliance as preparation for a confrontation. At precisely 8 p.m., a knock came. She opened the door to Carlo Ferretti, whose physical presence was assessed as being even more impactful than during their initial encounter. His attire was deliberately casual, with a disheveled affectation to soften his image from that of a mogul to a less intimidating, more appealing male figure. He made his observation. "You are ready," he noted, his gaze approving of her compliance. Her verbal protest was contradicted by her action of retrieving her purse. He dismissed her resistance, stating, "We have established this." Her claim of not taking orders was met with his approval. He reframed their dynamic, positing a shared, mutual obsession as the purpose of their meeting. The subject's denial was met with a knowing smile, indicating he correctly assessed her mental preoccupation with him. He urged her to cease resistance, correctly asserting her desire to attend. The subject conceded internally, wishing to analyze the peculiar dynamic and the stimulating effect this invasive individual had on her psyche. The subject attempted to set a boundary. One dinner. He agreed, though nonverbal cues suggested mutual deception. His Maserati was illegally parked and attended by a subordinate, whom Carlo dismissed with a nod, displaying his hierarchical power. As he held the passenger door, she questioned the guard. He reframed the man's role as logistical, preventing the car from being towed. He then offered a justification based on the neighborhood's perceived criminality, which the subject disputed. She defended the centro storico. He again used semantic reframing, substituting criminals with pragmatists. He then revealed a personal connection to the area, a disclosure designed to create an unexpected bond. The subject displayed surprise, a predictable reaction. He navigated the streets with innate familiarity while explaining his family had moderate wealth from a small shipping enterprise, not the aristocratic background one might assume. He detailed a modest upbringing. The subject's incomplete question about his ascent was anticipated by him. "How did I become this?" he prompted, gesturing to the symbols of his immense wealth and power. Subject C demonstrates a drive rooted in arduous effort, calculated financial ventures, and a strategic occupation of morally ambiguous operational zones. The paternal figure represented a baseline of risk-averse stasis. C's ambition demanded more. Consequently, he engaged in high-stakes actions his progenitor would have shunned. While some ventures yielded exceptional results, others precipitated near total ruin. Yet survival bred adaptation, culminating in an empire far exceeding his father's limited vision. A notable pride inflection was detected in his vocal pattern, yet it was overlaid with a secondary tone, possibly defensiveness. It suggests an ongoing internal monologue, justifying his trajectory to a disapproving paternal imago. I inquired, "Is your family still based in Naples?" My father passed 5 years prior. A myocardial infarction. My mother resides in a Capri villa I procured for her. She is unwilling to return to the metropolis, citing an excess of painful associations. My siblings and I jointly manage the family enterprise, although jointly is a generous descriptor. Our dynamic is one of mutual tolerance, focused on preventing personal animosities from eroding profit margins. We stopped before Pizzeria Dame Michel. A valet materialized instantly to claim the vehicle. Carlo relinquished the keys silently before circling to open my door. I queried, "You brought a Maserati to a pizzeria?" "I take this vehicle everywhere. What reason would I have to borrow a humbler car to gain your approval?" Amusement flickered in his gaze. "Would my standing increase if I appeared in a Fiat similar to yours?" "My Fiat possesses character. Your Fiat possesses corrosion and an engine warning lamp that, after prolonged illumination, has likely abandoned all hope. But I concede, it has character. That was an early observation I made about you." "What further observations did you make?" The question escaped my control. Carlo's hand came to rest on the small of my back, directing me toward the establishment's entrance. I observed everything, he stated in a low voice. That you leave your hair unbound, believing it projects a softer, less formidable presence in professional settings. That you compress your lower lip during concentration. That your right hand bears graphite smudges because you persist in manual sketching before digital completion. You are sinistral and prefer your coffee with milk and 1 measure of sugar. Furthermore, when you produce a genuine smile, distinct from the professional version for clients, a dimple manifests on your left cheek. I ceased my advance and pivoted to face him. How could you have acquired all that knowledge from yesterday? He responded evenly. I did not. I arranged for you to be followed today. The statement should have triggered a flight response. It should have incited outrage. In its place, I heard myself asking for his motive. Because I required knowledge of you. Because in 33 years, no one has denied me something as trivial as a parking space, and I had to comprehend the rationale. He reduced the distance between us. I registered his cologne. An opulent, dark blend of leather and cedar. He went on softly. What type of individual prioritizes a parking spot over avoiding a confrontation with someone of my profile? The more I discovered, he stated, the more captivating you proved to be. This is pathological, I remarked, though I remained stationary. Utterly pathological, he concurred. I ought to have dismissed you the instant you departed yesterday. Catalogued you as an amusing anecdote. His gaze locked with mine. But I was incapable of ceasing my thoughts about you, about the manner in which you appraised me as merely another individual, not as Carlo Ferretti. Regarding your obstinance, your intensity, the reality that you constructed a business from nothing and are struggling to sustain it in one of Italy's most fiercely competitive markets. I probed, how are you aware I built it from nothing? Because my knowledge is comprehensive, he clears throat answered simply. I am aware you graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts 6 years ago. I am aware you were employed by 3 design agencies, all of which you despised for their failure to respect your creative principles. I am aware you became independent 2 years ago and have faced constant difficulty for refusing to compromise your integrity for simple financial gain. I know your rent is 3 months in arrears, and that your diet consists mainly of pasta and vegetables for their low cost, and you have not acquired new apparel in over a year. A surge of heat filled my chest. It was acute and mortifying. He possessed total knowledge. Every setback, every principle I upheld, every delicate strand that constituted my life. I stated, I must depart. My voice was strained. This was an error in judgment. I turned, and his hand enclosed my wrist with a gentle pressure. Do not, he urged. Then more quietly, please. That word arrested my motion. Carlo Ferretti did not present as a man who used please with any frequency. He said in a low tone, my intent is not to cause you humiliation. My intent is to convey my understanding. I have been in your exact position. I have subsisted on only bread and olives when it was all I could procure. I have had lenders demanding payment at my door. I have spent nights awake, questioning my own sanity for thinking I could create an enterprise from nothing. His voice attenuated. And I need you to understand this. I perceive you, I truly perceive you, not the refined professional facade you present to clients, but the woman beneath, the one precariously holding things together while refusing to capitulate. I raised my eyes to his. This formidable, menacing man somehow comprehended my existence with unnerving accuracy. I questioned, "Why does this concern you?" "Because obstinacy recognizes its own kind," he stated. "Because I discern in you the same rejection of failure that propelled me. And because," he paused, selecting his words, "in all the years spent erecting my empire, I have been encircled by individuals who desire something from me." The subject was offered a clinical summary of transactional relationships: currency, influence, security, and advancement. He noted her initial failure to recognize his perceived status during a mundane territorial dispute. This deviation from the norm was presented as a unique, stimulating variable. The subject posited she was a mere curiosity, a diagnosis he immediately rejected. He employed idealization, labeling her real, a quality he claimed was absent from his environment. Physical restraint ceased, but proximity was maintained. He then pivoted to a disarming request for sustenance, feigning a vulnerability designed to elicit a sympathetic response. Despite clear evidence of predatory behavior, surveillance, and boundary violation, the subject exhibited a positive emotional reaction. "Very well," I conceded. "One pizza, but I will be covering my own expenses." "Unacceptable, Carlo." "Adriana," he cut in placidly. "My wealth exceeds what I could exhaust in 3 lifetimes. Your rent is 3 months delinquent. This matter is not open to negotiation. I am purchasing your dinner. Accept it with dignity. I refuse to accept charity." "Excellent," he said. "As do I. This is not a charitable act. This is a man inviting a woman of interest to dinner. Permit me to do this without transforming it into a conflict over pride and autonomy." He extended his hand. "Please." That word surfaced again. "Please." It neutralized my defenses more effectively than any directive could. I accepted his hand. The establishment was as congested as he had foreseen. A queue of tourists and residents extended beyond the entrance. Yet Carlo proceeded directly past them. The hostess acknowledged him by name, guiding us to a table in a rear corner. It was quiet, secluded, and insulated from the ambient clamor. I remarked, "You maintain a reserved table at a pizzeria that doesn't accept reservations." "I possess a certain rapport with the proprietor," he clarified. "Our grandfathers were acquaintances. Occasionally, old alliances hold more sway than currency." He did not look at the menu, placing our order for us in a swift Neapolitan dialect. I struggled to follow. I blinked. "What did you just request?" "2 margaritas, a marinara, a caprese salad, and fried zucchini blossoms." "Trust me. I lack sufficient knowledge of you to offer that trust. Then trust my knowledge of quality food. I have been dining here since the age of 6. My father brought us here each Sunday following church services. It was the sole indulgence he permitted himself. Pizza for the family, regardless of financial strain." His tone softened with the recollection. He invariably ordered in excess, maintaining that wasting food was unacceptable. My brothers and I would vie to see who could consume the greatest number of slices. I was the typical victor. That is somehow unsurprising. I commented, "You present as someone familiar with winning." "I am familiar with refusing to be defeated. A distinction exists." The waiter delivered wine, a house red, unpretentious, and Carlo poured for us both. "Describe your business to me. What was your motivation for becoming a designer?" "Your research has likely already provided that. I possess facts. I wish to hear your account. Your narrative, not the raw data my associates compiled." I took a small amount of wine, weighing the extent of my disclosure. My grandmother was a seamstress. She crafted wedding dresses, communion attire, bespoke suits for significant events. I was raised observing her transform fabric and thread into objects of beauty. She believed design was the discipline of perceiving potential rather than reality, of elevating the ordinary into the extraordinary. And that was your desire. I aimed to produce creations with significance, things that evoked an emotional response. During my time at the design firms, the focus was entirely on trends, algorithms, and what could achieve maximum clicks. There was no regard for artisanship or substance. The demand was for content engineered for viral spread and rapid monetization. I rotated my wine glass between my fingers, so I departed, established my own studio, convinced I could operate differently, correctly, and cultivate a reputation based on quality and integrity. But quality and integrity do not settle accounts as swiftly as viral content. No, they do not. I met his gaze, but my resolve is firm. I will find a solution. I consistently do. That obstinacy once more, Carlo noted, but he was smiling. What if I proposed that I could eliminate all your difficulties? A single telephone call would provide you with more clientele than you could manage. Would you permit me? No. For what reason? Because it would place me in your debt. And a debt to an individual like you is a perilous position. An individual like me, he reiterated softly. You're referring to someone engaged in enterprises that exist in legal ambiguity? Someone known for a ruthless disposition? Someone a mother would caution you against? My mother is deceased, I stated, yet he conceded. Indeed, if she were living, she would issue a strong caution against me. A wise woman. You ought to heed her theoretical warnings. He reclined as their meal was served, a pizza with a notably powerful aroma that elicited an audible physiological response from her stomach. He then observed, "But you will ignore it, correct? Your curiosity is too compelling." Because some part of you requires observing the outcome of entering my world for a time. Her verbalized rejection was swift. I am not entering your world. I am consuming pizza. There is a distinction. He then performed a controlling action, placing a slice on her plate. Eat. Then we can negotiate the parameters of this arrangement. The food was reported as being of transcendent quality, a simple perfection reinforcing the culinary identity of Naples. They consumed their meal in a quiet interval for several minutes, during which she exhibited signs of reduced anxiety despite the situation's atypical nature. Carlo initiated a sudden shift in topic. Provide me with a piece of authentic data, something you've never disclosed. Her response was guarded. Why would I do that? Because I require an understanding of you, the core subject, not the public facade. And I will offer a reciprocal disclosure, a fair exchange. She weighed the options of refusal versus compliance. However, a confluence of environmental factors, the low ambient lighting, the wine, and an unexpected sense of intimacy induced a state of recklessness. She made an admission. I am in a state of terror. I awaken each day, terrified I have erred, that I should have remained at the design firm, suppressed my ego for a stable income, that I will fail, be left with nothing, that my persistence is not a strength. It is merely a foolish pride that will result in my ruin. Carlo remained silent for a moment, his dark eyes conducting a close study of her facial expressions. Your turn, she prompted. A truthful disclosure, he stated plainly. I experience profound loneliness. I possess wealth, influence, and deference. I have subordinates who execute my commands and associates who seek my favor. I have family who accept me and women available on demand. Yet I lack anyone who perceives me, truly perceives me as you did yesterday, when you saw only an irritating man attempting to appropriate your parking space. All others perceive Carlo Ferretti, the construct. You simply saw the individual. The vulnerability manifest in this statement was disarming to her. This was not the arrogant subject from the previous day, nor the confident one who had commanded her presence at dinner. This was an individual who possessed all metrics of success except for what held actual significance. That must be draining, she remarked quietly. Constant performance, always embodying Carlo Ferretti. It is the cost of success within my sphere. One is not permitted to be human. One is required to be effective. He refilled their wine glasses. But with you, the performance is unnecessary. You are indifferent to my financial status or my network. You assess me as arrogant, invasive, and likely dangerous. Your assessment is accurate on all points, but it is at least an honest one. This is the most abnormal dinner I have ever experienced, she stated. Excellent. Abnormal is superior to tedious. I have endured enough tedious dinners for multiple lifetimes. He took another piece of pizza. Now describe your grandmother, the seamstress. Is she still living? No. She expired 4 years ago. Cancer. The subject noted a familiar ache in her chest. She was the one who prompted me to attend the academy, who affirmed my talent was worthy of development. My parents deemed art impractical, that I should pursue a sensible field like accounting or law. But Nana had faith in me, and upon her death, I nearly abandoned my path. I considered that my parents' assessment was correct, that my pursuit was foolish. But I then concluded that surrender would negate all she had taught me. So I persevered in her memory. Carlo then reached across the table, taking her hand. This physical contact should have registered as presumptuous. Their familiarity was minimal, yet the gesture felt grounding, tangible. She would be proud of you, he said. To struggle, but refuse to capitulate, is more honorable than to succeed through a compromise of one's principles. You seem to speak from personal experience. I have engaged in both, compromise and the refusal to compromise. I can report which one facilitates sleep at night. His thumb circled the back of her hand. But I have also learned that survival can demand adaptability. There's a distinction between compromising core values and being strategically practical. Is that your self-justification? That your ethically ambiguous business dealings are strategic practicality? Yes. And also that the world is not binary. The legal apparatus often reflects the distribution of power, not objective, right and wrong. I function in the liminal spaces where formal rules are ineffective. Does this classify me as a criminal or a pragmatist? That depends on the arbiter. And what is your self-assessment? Carlo paused for a moment. His dark eyes were unreadable. My self-assessment is based on my adherence to my word. I make few promises, but I honor those I make. I defend what is mine. I do not betray the trust placed in me. The law might view me as questionable, but my conscience is clear. And am I now yours to protect? She asked, her query a blend of challenge and test. That is under consideration. Are you deciding to permit me? He leaned forward, his focus now completely centered upon her. Because this is my proposal, Adriana. I wish to see you again. Not for singular casual dinners where we simulate normalcy. I wish to determine the trajectory of this. You and I, this connection, whatever it is, that is irrational. We only met yesterday. I have made decisions with far greater consequences in shorter time frames. I am adept at assessing situations, and this one is clear. You are compelling, intelligent, obstinate, and authentic. Such qualities are rare individually. Combined in one person, they warrant pursuit. And what would pursuit entail? She asked, her heart rate accelerating, as I have no interest in being a wealthy man's temporary amusement. Good, because I have no interest in the temporary. When I commit, my commitment is total. If we proceed, if you consent to see me, to explore this phenomenon, you will not be a casual diversion. You will be someone I am selecting, someone I am investing in. Investing in, she repeated. That sounds transactional. All interactions are transactional. The pertinent question is if the transaction is equitable, if both parties receive respect and honesty in the exchange. He increased the pressure of his grip on her hand. I can provide you with things, not charity, but opportunities. Introductions to clientele with resources and taste, security, protection, a life not characterized by a struggle for survival. And what is sought in return? You, your time, your focus, your honesty. I require someone who will inform me when I'm being an arrogant bastard. Someone who will contend with me over parking and reservations and any other issue that activates your stubborn nature. I require the authentic Adriana. You, unfiltered and uncompromising. She ought to have refused. She should have identified the dynamic for what it was. A powerful man, accustomed to achieving his objectives, making a proposition that appeared generous but was attached to unseen conditions. Yet she was tempted. When had anyone last regarded her as Carlo was now, as someone of value, as something worthy of pursuit, as if her obstinance were an asset, not a flaw? She finally stated, I require time for consideration. That is fair. Take your time. I am not departing. He released her hand and signaled for the bill. But during your deliberation, allow me to present something. Present what? My world. The elements that are not grim or hazardous. The elements that might hold an appeal for a person like you. He smiled. Let us proceed. The night is young, and Naples is quite beautiful this time of year. They departed the restaurant, walking through the narrow streets of the Centro Storico. Carlo indicated properties he owned, shared anecdotes of the area's history, and introduced her to vendors who showed him clear deference and respect. This presentation was inconsistent with the rumors of a dangerous syndicate leader. This was a man integrated into his city who understood its rhythms and hidden structures. Their walk concluded at Castel dell'Ovo, which overlooks the bay. The castle was closed, but Carlo made a call, and they were granted access to the ramparts. The vista was striking. Naples lay before them, its lights like a field of fireflies. Vesuvius was a dark silhouette against the night sky. I come here when I need to process information, Carlo said, leaning on the stone. When business complexities or family conflicts become excessive. From up here, everything seems manageable. Problems that appear insurmountable at street level are reduced to their proper scale. It is beautiful. I concede it is, she said, but that is not the reason I brought you here. He turned to face her directly. I brought you here so you could observe me in a state where I am not performing. Not Carlo Ferretti, the businessman, just Carlo, a man weary of solitude, who perceived something in you that made him willing to risk rejection, who is standing here hoping you will agree to see him again. The vulnerability in his vocal tone disarmed her completely. This was not the arrogant individual demanding her presence. This was someone making a genuine request, expressing hope and taking a risk. She spoke in a low whisper. One more date. Allow me to know you, the real person, not the reputation. If it seems correct, we can see its course. If not, we separate as not friends, but as two individuals who shared quality pizza. Carlo's smile was like a sunrise. One more date. That is a variable I can work with. He moved closer, and she anticipated he would initiate a kiss. She should have retreated, reinforced her boundaries, and maintained a professional distance. Instead, she leaned forward. The kiss was contrary to her expectations, soft, almost hesitant, as if he feared she might flee if he applied too much pressure. His touch, a thumb tracing her cheekbone, is noted as the catalyst for a significant psychological shift within the subject, Adriana. Her established defense mechanisms, a result of prior relational disappointments, began to fracture. Upon their separation, marked by dyspnea in both parties, Carlo initiated physical proximity, articulating a projection that she would be his undoing. He framed her as an invasive presence, capable of reactivating desires he had consciously suppressed. The subject responded with unexpected assertiveness, stating, "Good," expressing a wish for him to experience human desire over mere efficacy. He reacted with a low, intimate laugh, citing her statement as an example of her disarming influence. When the subject confessed her own disorientation in the dynamic, he mirrored her sentiment, a technique to foster a shared sense of confusion and dependency. She then proposed a joint effort to navigate their situation. He withdrew slightly, his gaze fixed on her face in a gesture of assessment. He then assumed control, stating he would take her home and had arranged a subsequent meeting, instructing her to wear practical footwear. She noted his pre-planning, to which he responded by affirming his total commitment once a decision is made. He framed this commitment not as a command, but as a promise, a verbal manipulation that she perceived as reassuring rather than threatening. During the transit to her residence along deserted streets, intermittent physical contact was initiated by him. A state of nonverbal calm settled between them, which the subject found paradoxical given their acquaintance of less than 48 hours. Upon arrival, he performed a courtesy gesture of opening her car door and escorting her to the building's entrance. The subject verbalized gratitude for the dinner, the location, and what she termed his non-terrifying demeanor. Carlo countered with a slight smile, admitting a capacity for intimidation when required, but exempting her from it. "Never with you," he affirmed, removing a strand of hair from her face in a display of calculated tenderness. He gave instructions for their meeting at 10 the next morning. When she inquired about the destination, he labeled it a surprise and tested her compliance by asking, "Do you trust me?" Her negative response was met with approval. He then kissed her forehead, an unexpectedly gentle gesture that elicited a strong emotional response, and urged her to attend regardless. The subject observed his departure before ascending the 4 flights to her apartment, her thoughts consumed by the preceding events. She had consented to another meeting with Carlo Ferretti, engaged in physical intimacy, and was contemplating a relationship with an individual operating in ethically ambiguous territory who had her under surveillance. A state of exhilaration was reported, in stark contrast to the expected response of fear. Later, a text message arrived from a new, unknown number. It read, "Do not block this one. I need to contact you." She questioned his number of phones, to which CF, or Carlo Ferretti, replied, "Enough." He inquired if she had a positive experience, a clear bid for validation. Her reply indicated his presence confirmed her enjoyment. He clarified that he sought to ensure her feelings were congruent post-event, as initial enjoyment can be followed by regret. She denied any regret but deferred final judgment until after his planned outing. The text from CF described the plan not as mysterious, but as perfect, and concluded with the endearment, "Bella," meaning beautiful. This term elicited a positive emotional response from the subject. She fell asleep holding the device, dreaming of him. The following morning, she was prepared by 9:30, compliant with his instructions for casual attire. The subject held the belief that any action undertaken by Carlo would be significant. He arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, presenting an attractive image in casual dress. He brought 2 cups of coffee and fresh pastries, a gesture of provision. He announced they had a significant drive ahead, handing her the breakfast items. The route proceeded from Naples into the hills, offering dramatic coastal views. Carlo operated the vehicle with confidence, providing commentary on regional landmarks and history as they drove farther up. He employed a narrative of his childhood, recounting family trips to the area to construct a shared history and feign vulnerability. He described these as simpler times before complications arose. The subject inquired about the onset of those complications, which he identified as the age he understood the illicit nature of his father's shipping business. He identified the moment of choice between a safe path and a high-risk expansion of the enterprise. He glanced at her, confirming, "I chose bigger," and noted his father's subsequent disapproval. When asked if he regretted this choice, he admitted to occasional doubts. These doubts, he claimed, typically surface at 3 a.m. during periods of sleeplessness. However, he stated that daylight reinforces his motivations: freedom, power, and legacy. He then took her hand, adding that the opportunity to share this with an understanding partner was a new factor. They arrived via a private road at a villa at the hillside, aesthetically pleasing but not overtly opulent. It featured traditional architecture and was surrounded by established olive groves and gardens. As they stopped, she asked about ownership. He confirmed, "This is mine." He stated he purchased it 3 years prior and had it restored, using it as a retreat from the city to reconnect with his core identity. He then exited the vehicle to open her door, making a significant disclosure. "I have never brought anyone here before. You are the first." This admission is a classic tactic to make the subject feel uniquely valued. The villa's interior was furnished with understated elegance, featuring abundant natural light and curated original artwork. A professional-grade kitchen and a living area with a fireplace opened onto a terrace with an expansive view which the subject found overwhelming. "Carlo, this is—" she began, unable to articulate a response. He then guided her towards a large, empty, light-filled room with windows on 3 sides. He explained that upon researching her work, he envisioned the space as her studio, a place for her to create, free from external pressures, a place that was hers. The subject expressed disbelief at his apparent offer to gift her the space. "I want to offer it," he corrected, a subtle reframing of the transaction. He presented it as an unconditional offer intended to facilitate her work and provide a foundation for her business should she choose to explore a relationship with him. The subject's initial refusal, citing that it was too much and their acquaintance too brief, was calmly dismissed. He countered that their reciprocal knowledge was deeper than that of many established couples, a gross overstatement designed to accelerate intimacy. He preemptively acknowledged his negative traits, arrogance and invasiveness, while simultaneously diagnosing her as stubborn, talented, and financially distressed. He framed these as objective facts, positioning the core issue as whether their connection was a viable foundation for a relationship. His hands framed her face in a controlling yet gentle manner. He carefully clarified his offer was not for a permanent commitment, but simply a workspace to alleviate her financial burdens. She correctly identified that this offer represented security and freedom. Everything. He interrupted, reframing it as something she deserved and had earned, appealing to her sense of pride while maintaining control. "Let me give you this, Adriana," he urged, framing the offer as an altruistic act that cost him nothing, but would provide her immense relief. The subject recognized the implicit expectations and the entanglement that accepting help from him would entail. Yet she was also acutely aware that he was right about her needs. She repeated her need for time to think. He readily agreed, stating neither the villa nor he was going anywhere, a statement of possessive permanence. He then placed a key in her hand, granting her unconditional access, a powerful gesture designed to create an obligation and tether her to the property. They remained at the villa, where Carlo prepared a simple lunch. The meal served as a backdrop for further disclosures. He discussed his family business dynamics, casting himself as the sole bearer of ultimate responsibility. This setting facilitated a heightened sense of intimacy and normalcy. The subject in turn disclosed her history of dysfunctional relationships with men who sought to either fix or save her. This self-disclosure made her more vulnerable. In this context, the subject reported a feeling of being understood. Carlo then refilled their wine glasses, stating, "I do not want to fix you." The subject's self-perception as damaged is reclassified as a temporary resource deficiency, a notable distinction. A quiet laugh is her response. Her schema for male behavior involves either rescue or avoidance. The benefactor dismisses the studio's value, a classic devaluing tactic, stating calmly, "It is nothing to me," while citing innumerable property assets. The villa is unoccupied for 11 months annually. The transaction costs him nothing while offering her everything. A calculated imbalance of investment. He then probes her for suspicion of implicit conditions, a standard test of trust. She confirms this is typical human behavior. He counters, stating his intention to deviate from this pattern with her. He employs a strategy of forced honesty, taking her hand to establish physical connection. His stated intentions are transparent. Physical desire, hope for a committed relationship, and an investment of his resources. However, he isolates the studio from these desires, gently squeezing her hand for emphasis. The offer is not contingent upon sexual compliance, commitment, or any service beyond her artistic output. Should her romantic interest wane, the studio remains hers without recourse or guilt, a verbal contract. The subject scans his expression for any tells of manipulation or calculation. She perceives only sincerity, a finding that induces more anxiety than deceit would. She softly questions his motives, highlighting her lack of transactional value. No wealth, influence, or connections. He confirms that others approach him for their own advantage, seeking access to his power. Her ignorance of his identity was the initial point of fixation. She had confronted him over a trivial matter as if he were an ordinary man. This authenticity, he states quietly, is not just refreshing, it is intoxicating. She identifies this as being treated like a novelty. He firmly refutes this, framing her as real in a synthetic world, a resource he selfishly desires. He reveals a secondary location, a converted barn previously unseen by the subject. Its wide windows and chimneys suggest a creative space. The interior is a woodworking shop with tools and half-completed furniture arranged with precision. A fine layer of sawdust covers all surfaces. The benefactor, Carlos, identifies this as his personal space for tangible creation, a retreat from management and political maneuvering. The subject moves through the room, observing a table, chairs, and a well-made bookshelf, noting the high level of craftsmanship. She inquires if he built them. He confirms this, citing a lesson from his father, the value of creation over acquisition, one of few paternal lessons he valued. He touches a tabletop, stating that in this space, he is not the powerful Carlo Ferretti, but simply Carlo, a boy taught to measure twice and cut once. He understands that quality requires patience and cannot be rushed. This display of vulnerability, sharing his private creative sanctuary, elicits a strong, empathetic response in the subject. This was not the powerful figure, but another individual compelled by a creative drive. She observes a kindred spirit who understands that creation feeds the soul in a way financial acquisition cannot. She whispers her gratitude for this disclosure. He leverages the moment, stating he wanted her to see his understanding of a non-lucrative, essential drive, thereby building rapport. He posits they are not dissimilar, both having risen from nothing through sheer tenacity. The primary difference, he claims, is his own moral compromise in darker territories. The subject correctly identifies this as seduction via philosophical alignment, yet she is smiling. He asks if the tactic is effective. Perhaps. The subject closes the physical gap between them, suggesting she is enjoying this exposure to his true self, the furniture maker and secret villa owner. He corrects her, stating she is the sole woman brought to this location. His hands move to her waist, drawing her closer. He expresses a hope for her frequent return, an open-ended invitation without pressure. She remarks on his rapid escalation. At 33, he claims to have no more time for inconsequential pursuits. When he identifies something of value, he sees no logic in cautious approaches. Life is brief and should be spent with those who induce a feeling of being alive. She makes him feel human, a superior state. He initiates a kiss, commanding her to cease overthinking. This physical contact is deeper and more urgent than their previous encounter, fueled by their growing connection and the isolation of the space. His hands entwine in her hair as hers grip his shoulders. For a brief interval, only the moment exists. After they separate, he rests his forehead on hers, requesting she stay for dinner in the night, clarifying it is not a sexual proposition unless she desires it. The subject's response was to offer a service, seeking to prolong the interaction. A clear manifestation of cognitive dissonance occurred. Her rational assessment identified extreme risk, yet was overridden by an emotional impulse justified by framing the encounter as a state of heightened vitality. She ultimately consented. Upon her agreement, he displayed a calculated expression of approval designed to reduce his perceived threat level. He announced a task requiring significant time, explicitly framing it as a method of securing her presence. Her internal response indicated acceptance of this confinement. The subsequent hours were recorded as a period of acclimation. While Carlos prepared the meal, she explored the villa, eventually settling in the studio with her sketchbook. Creative impulses, dormant for months, began to flow. The lighting and the space were optimal, reawakening a creativity that had been suppressed by financial distress. Carlos appeared in the doorway after 30 minutes, announcing dinner. She looked up, having been absorbed in her work for over 2 hours. She declared the space absolutely perfect. He confirmed its status as hers, stating the discussion was closed and her hesitation was no longer relevant. He approached to examine her sketches, pronouncing them beautiful. He inquired if they were for the hotel project. Some were, while others were nascent personal concepts she previously lacked the mental capacity to explore. He affirmed she now had both time and space. Dinner was a lavish affair, served by candlelight on the terrace as the sun set. He repeated his earlier request for a novel disclosure. After some thought, she confessed to fear that the current reality is a dream from which she will awaken to her former state of struggle. Carlo provided reassurance of his and the villa's reality, acknowledging the disorienting nature of recent events. The subject notes the extreme shift in her circumstances. 48 hours prior, she was in conflict with him over a parking space. Now, she is his guest, contemplating an offer that would fundamentally alter her life. He observes that life changes quickly when one relinquishes careful control. He refilled their glasses, offering his own disclosure. He has not felt this relaxed in years, as his baseline is strategic calculation. With her, he can simply exist, a state he finds both unsettling and wonderful. The lack of control is new and exciting for him. After dinner, they moved inside to a fire. The conversation deepened, covering childhood, ambitions, fears, and failures. He spoke of failed business deals, his exposure to violence, and the burden of leading an organization where many livelihoods depend on him. She questioned if he ever desires to abandon his family business and begin anew. He admitted to a daily temptation but cited his indispensability. Too many depend on him. His brothers, while competent in their roles, lack the broader strategic vision to lead. The subject, Carlo, rationalizes his criminal enterprise by invoking a responsibility to his dependents. He then objectifies the patient, Adriana, equating her to his villa, a controlled environment for obtaining peace, thus initiating a pattern of psychological grooming through a calculated, gentle touch. He casts the patient as a simplifying agent in his own complex world, a narcissistic projection. The patient exhibits cognitive dissonance, but he reframes her emotional turmoil as a positive indicator of a correct choice, thereby invalidating her own intuition and seizing narrative control. She is escorted to a guest room, a controlled and isolated space. The subject, Carlo, lingers at the threshold, performing a respect for boundaries that he clearly intends to dismantle, a subtle test of her compliance. In her gratitude, he advances, escalating the physical intimacy. He explicitly states his intention to prevent her withdrawal, a verbal confirmation of his possessive intent. This rapid progression is a textbook maneuver to overwhelm the patient's defenses. His promise of everything is a classic love-bombing tactic. The patient's disorientation is a predictable response to the rapid, destabilizing changes in her status and environment, moving from a state of precarity to being the companion of a powerful figure. Her internal monologue displays an awareness of the danger, yet an undeniable attraction, a hallmark of a developing trauma bond. His text message serves as a probe, testing her state of mind and the established physical separation. I note the patient's decision to disregard the established boundary. Instead of remaining in her designated safe space, she proceeds towards the subject's room, a significant behavioral marker in the erosion of her self-protective instincts. The subject presents himself in a state of undress, a display of casual dominance. The patient's query, wavering between stupid and brave, reveals her profound internal conflict, which he validates by affirming both, thus normalizing her confusion. He initiates physical contact, pulling her into his bed and enclosing her, an act of spatial and physical control. When questioned about the relationship's viability, she correctly identifies the power imbalance, expressing a rational fear. The patient's sense of self-worth is clearly linked to her socioeconomic status. He systematically dismantles this by elevating her intrinsic qualities over her lack of connections, thereby positioning himself as the sole arbiter of her value. He employs a classic isolation tactic, dismissing his social circle as irrelevant. This maneuver aims to make the patient believe he is her sole protector and that her authenticity is a value only he can truly appreciate, deepening her dependency. The subject lists attributes he finds desirable, a form of mirroring to create a sense of deep connection. His claim of long-term commitment, despite their brief acquaintance, is a strategy to accelerate intimacy and bypass rational assessment. He interprets her presence in his room as a sign of her own insanity, creating a shared narrative of mutual reckless abandon. This reframing absolves him of predatory behavior and casts them as equal partners in a high-stakes endeavor. Her admission of poor self-preservation is met with approval, reinforcing the desirability of lowered defenses. His invitation to sleep beside him is framed as a non-threatening request for comfort, a further escalation of intimacy. His use of the word please is a calculated display of vulnerability designed to dismantle her final resistances. Her quiet acquiescence marks a critical point of surrender. The proximity to his heartbeat serves as a potent physiological anchor for the bond. He preemptively addresses her fears regarding his reputation, a disarming maneuver to build trust. Her statement, "I am choosing to believe you," reveals a conscious suspension of disbelief, a necessary step in accepting the untenable situation. The experience of feeling safe and chosen in his arms is indicative of Stockholm Syndrome. Waking alone continues a pattern of control and unpredictability, leaving her dependent on his return for stability. A note dictates her morning routine, reinforcing his control even in his absence. The provision of an abundance of food is a primitive display of care and power, establishing him as her primary provider. He explicitly links the act of providing food to a familial expression of love, a potent conditioning tool he admittedly employs to foster a sense of affection and dependency in the patient. He manages her transition back to her world, asserting his control over her social life. The art gallery event is presented as a professional opportunity for her, masking its true purpose to publicly display her as his partner. When she resists objectification as a trophy, he reframes it as being his choice. This semantic shift deflects her concern while reinforcing his dominant position. He states his intent to use her to enhance his own public image. He frames the integration of his personal and business life as a logical strategy to benefit her career. This utilitarian argument is designed to quell her emotional unease by appealing to her ambition and pragmatism. During the return journey, he maintains near constant physical contact, reinforcing their connection. The patient interprets his expression as satisfaction, projecting contentment onto him following a successful acquisition. His insistence on escorting her to her apartment door is a territorial display. Framed as chivalry, the kiss is a reassertion of physical dominance, designed to leave a lasting physiological impression. He gives her a key, a powerful symbol of ownership over his domains. This gesture grants access, but also serves as a tether. He calmly dismisses her objections, asserting his financial power and her powerlessness to refuse. He pathologizes her self-sufficiency as a barrier to be overcome. His financial support is presented not as a gift, but as a strategic asset for her to use, making refusal seem illogical and counterproductive to her own goals. Back in her own environment, the patient experiences acute cognitive dissonance. A subsequent surge in creative productivity suggests a subconscious drive to validate the subject's investment in her talent. The patient's limited wardrobe underscores the significant power imbalance between them. Her choice of a single elegant dress, previously worn for professional self-advancement, is noted as she prepares for a new role defined by him. The outcome was deemed adequate, though unremarkable. Subject Carlo arrived at precisely 1900 hours. The subject's facial expression upon observing me was, in itself, sufficient validation to counteract prior anxieties. His verbal assessment was concise. "You look beautiful. Perfect." The venue was a repurposed warehouse in an affluent district, its high ceilings and stark walls serving as a backdrop for notable and high-value contemporary art. Carlo guided me through the assembly with a proprietary hand on my lumbar region, presenting me to a significant portion of Naples's cultural elite. His introduction was specific. "This is Adriana Romano, an exceptional designer. You must see her work." He consistently omitted romantic qualifiers, framing my identity as professional, a tactic I registered with more gratitude than he likely understood. While we were analyzing a notable abstract composition, a female voice punctuated the ambient noise. "Carlo Ferretti, I was informed you were bringing a companion tonight. I needed to verify this myself." I pivoted to face a woman in her early 30s whose polished, blonde appearance denoted generational wealth and rigorous upkeep. Her gaze held a poorly veiled contempt as Carlo's tone became meticulously neutral. "Bianca, I was not aware of your attendance. Polo invited me. He believed I would value the collection. Her eyes performed a swift assessment of my person. So, this is the much-discussed woman, the one who confronted you over a parking space. How novel. Carlo stated, Adriana, this is Bianca Conti, a past acquaintance. An old girlfriend, Bianca amended. Our relationship lasted nearly a year before Carlo determined he preferred solitude over my company. The social tension was acute. I initiated a withdrawal, but Carlo's grip on my waist intensified. He stated calmly, Bianca and I were involved briefly 3 years prior. It was not a viable pairing. We had divergent goals. You mean I desired commitment and you desired options? Bianca countered, her smile sharp. But it seems your position has shifted. Is Carlo Ferretti actually attending a public function with a date? This is newsworthy. She must be quite special. She is, Carlo affirmed simply, now if you will permit us. One moment, I am intrigued. Bianca closed the distance, her appraisal of me clinical as if I were an exhibit. What is your profession, Adriana? Let me speculate. A model, an actress, Carlo's standard preference. Maintaining a level vocal tone, I stated. I am a designer, specializing in graphic and brand identity. How fascinating. And your education? The Academy of Fine Arts here in Naples. Lovely. And your family? Are they also involved in the arts? The inquiry was a thinly veiled social audit designed to ascertain my class, connections, and suitability. Carlo's expression hardened. He had identified the maneuver. Bianca, this line of questioning is tiresome. Adriana has no need to validate her presence to you or anyone else. Bianca adopted a saccharine tone. I am merely engaging in conversation, becoming acquainted with the woman who has secured Carlo Ferretti's focus. It's a considerable achievement. Most of us barely sustained it for a few months. Perhaps that is more indicative of you than of Carlo, I retorted, the response surprising even me. If you failed to hold his attention, perhaps you were not as compelling as you presumed. Bianca's eyes narrowed. Be cautious, my dear. You are unaware of whom you're addressing. Carlo's voice interjected, low and dangerously controlled. As are you, he said. Adriana is under my protection. Consequently, an issue with her becomes an issue with me. I recommend you disengage Bianca before the situation deteriorates. The implied threat was explicit. Bianca's face flushed with anger, but she manufactured a smile. Of course, I intended no conflict. Enjoy the exhibition. She departed, leaving a palpable tension. After she was gone, Carlo said quietly, My apologies for that. Bianca does not process rejection well. I ought to have informed you of her potential presence. It's acceptable, I replied, regulating my breathing. I am capable of managing jealous ex-partners. Then more pointedly, I am curious, though, how many of your former partners will I confront at these functions? Not a significant number, he answered. I have not been in a serious relationship for years. Bianca was the last one approaching that definition, and even that was based more on convenience than an actual bond. He led me to a less populated area of the gallery. But I must be forthright with you, he went on. My personal history is not simple. There have been other women, a great many to be precise, but none of them were significant. None were you. That has the quality of a prepared line. It is not, he stated plainly. I've had transactional relationships, arrangements of mutual benefit without emotional entanglement. I've had brief dalliances with women desiring the status of my association, and I have had precisely one relationship that approximated authenticity. It concluded 3 years ago upon my realization that we remained together from habit, not genuine affection. He took my hands. But this, what I experience with you, is different. It is authentic, it is potent, and it is likely progressing too rapidly, but it is sincere. It is imperative that you know that. I said softly, I believe you, but it is necessary for you to grasp that this is intimidating for me. Your world, these individuals, the protocols, the scrutiny, it is all quite overwhelming. I am aware, he said, and should it ever become excessive, you must inform me. We will devise an alternative. He drew me nearer. But do not permit individuals like Bianca to instill self-doubt. You belong here. You are gifted, intelligent, and fully entitled to occupy this space. I paused. Even if I lack a background of wealth, I inquired. Even if my family has no influence, especially because of that. You secured your position via merit and effort, not inheritance. That holds greater value. He kissed my temple. Now come, I will introduce you to Paolo. He is the collector I spoke of, the one who may have an interest in your portfolio. The remainder of the event was a rapid sequence of introductions. Paolo Santoro was a gregarious man in his 50s with a deep appreciation for art and the capital to support it. He reviewed my portfolio, which Carlo had somehow procured on his device, with authentic interest. Paolo remarked, scrolling through the images, "This is superior work. It is sophisticated yet approachable. Precisely the aesthetic we require for a hotel rebranding project I am developing. Are you available to meet at my office next week? I want to discuss commissioning you." I endeavored to suppress my eagerness. Of course, I would be pleased to. Paolo smiled. Carlo possesses excellent judgment in art and, it seems, in people. You are exceptionally talented, Adriana. I anticipate our collaboration. Hours later, as we departed the gallery, I experienced a sensation of weightlessness. A prospective major client and validation from an industry authority, all facilitated by Carlo's invitation and his strategic positioning of me as a person of substance. Once inside the vehicle, I said, "Thank you for this evening, for the introduction to Paolo, for making me feel included." "You were included. I merely ensured others took notice." He took my hand. "And now I am returning you to my apartment. We have things to discuss." That sounds portentous. Not portentous, merely candid. There are facts you should understand about me, my enterprise, and the implications of an association with me. He glanced toward me, and you must determine if that is a reality you can tolerate. Carlo's residence was in Chia, with a view of the bay. The space was elegant, but showed signs of actual use. Books on tables, art that appeared personally curated, not professionally staged. It conveyed a sense of being inhabited, not merely displayed. He poured wine for us both and gestured to the sofa. "Sit. Allow me to be entirely transparent with you regarding my identity and my activities." I sat, my pulse accelerating. This was the critical juncture, the complete disclosure concerning Carlo Ferretti's business affairs, the ethical ambiguities he had alluded to, the reasons his name was spoken with a mix of deference and fear. "My family's shipping company is legitimate," he started. "We transport commercial products, electronics, textiles, machinery, via regulated, legal routes. This operation provides consistent, taxable revenue and employs more than 200 individuals. It serves as the base for all other operations." "And the other operations?" "The other operations exist in domains where legal definitions are fluid. We arrange transactions for parties who require discretion. We transport goods that may lack complete documentation but are not strictly prohibited. We offer security and logistics for clients unable or unwilling to use conventional services. He met my gaze. I do not traffic narcotics. I do not traffic human beings. I am not complicit in activities that cause direct harm to non-combatants. However, I do function outside the rigid parameters of legal trade. Why? If the primary business is profitable, why engage in the illicit? Because the primary business has constraints, its growth is gradual. The margins are moderate, and there are individuals within my family and organization who require opportunities that legitimate sectors cannot offer. Former inmates unable to secure standard employment, skilled people without proper documentation, families needing income who cannot afford the slow pace of the formal economy. He leaned in. I am not offering a justification. I am offering an explanation. This is my identity. This is my function. And the violence, the reports about those who defy you, some of those reports are accurate. I have inflicted harm on those who threaten my interests or my people. I have made examples of those who stole from me or violated my trust. I do not take pride in it, but I feel no shame for it either. In my sphere of influence, reputation is a form of capital. If you are perceived as weak, you will be exploited. So yes, I have employed ruthlessness when it has been required. The candor was both disarming and profoundly unsettling. Most individuals would have moderated the truth, attempting to appear more sympathetic. Carlo was presenting me with the unvarnished facts. My query was direct. Why this level of disclosure? It could have remained ambiguous, a gradual revelation. The subject's response was a classic manipulation, a claim that I deserved foreknowledge. He stated that for a true union, he required my acceptance of his complete pathology, not a sanitized construct. He presented his unvarnished self, replete with its inherent complications and moral distortions. He initiated physical contact, a gesture of feigned intimacy. I will not engage in deception, Adriana. I will not present a false persona. However, the onus is on you to determine if this reality is tenable. A period of cognitive assessment followed. The facts were clear. Carlo Ferretti engaged in illicit enterprise. He had inflicted harm. He functioned beyond legal statutes, justifying his actions within a self-authored moral code. A rational actor would withdraw. Yet my analysis was compromised by memories of his curated kindness, a shared meal, access to his private compound, a display of his craft, and an emotional anecdote about his deceased father. He validated my professional talent and offered advancement without explicit reciprocity, creating a profound sense of recognition previously unknown to me. I finally articulated my decision. I am not naive. I comprehend the implications of your disclosure and recognize the logical course is retreat. Yet the desire to do so is absent. I wish to observe the trajectory of this dynamic. I wish to remain with you despite full knowledge of your nature. Is this indicative of a cognitive deficit? He reframed it. It indicates either bravery or recklessness, perhaps both. He decreased the physical distance between us, but it also induces a state of euphoria I have not experienced in years. I had prepared for your departure. In fact, I anticipated it. Your decision to stay, to choose this, to choose me, it is of paramount significance. I stated, I have stipulations. Enumerate them. First, deception is forbidden. A direct query must receive a direct answer, even if the answer is, I cannot disclose that for your own safety. Acknowledged. Second, I will not be complicit in your illegal activities. I require no details. I will not be present for any questionable conduct. I will accept it as a facet of your existence, but I will not be a participant. Also acknowledged. I would never place you in such a scenario. Third, should this association jeopardize my person or my career, if it invites legal consequence or demolishes my professional standing, we terminate relations immediately. No debate. Carlo's jaw muscles tensed, but he acquiesced. If you are ever endangered by my association, I will excise myself from your life. You have my guarantee. Very well. I inhaled deeply. I am committing to this fully. This is no longer an assessment of compatibility. I am choosing this. Choosing you. The resultant smile on his face was a profound display of narcissistic supply. He initiated an embrace, a kiss with an intensity that induced a brief hypoxic state. When we disengaged, both exhibiting labored breathing, he rested his forehead on mine. You will not regret this, was his assertion. I will guarantee it. My honest reply, regret is a possibility, but I am proceeding nonetheless. The remainder of the night was spent in dialogue regarding his familial structure, my ambitions, and the projected architecture of our relationship. Carlo was explicit in his requirements. He desired my cohabitation at the villa, at least on a partial basis, to facilitate my work and our proximity. He wished for our association to be public, to establish me as his partner. He offered to advance my career via his network, contingent on my consent. He stated, "My intent is not control, but I am incapable of moderate investment. If we are partnered, I require a total integration, not a casual arrangement with sporadic contact. I require your full presence in my life." That is extreme. I know. Perhaps too extreme, but I find it appealing. I have experienced a surplus of indifferent men. Perhaps extremity is what I require. I remained that night in his residence, in his bed. This time, our interaction escalated beyond kissing. Intimacy with Carlo was congruent with his entire being, intense, passionate, and overwhelmingly potent. He was concurrently attentive and demanding, assimilating my preferences while pushing me toward previously unknown psychological and physical thresholds. Afterward, lying intertwined, I experienced a state of both physiological satisfaction and psychological alarm at the intensity of my emotional response. Carlo murmured into my hair, "You are overanalyzing again. I can almost perceive your cognitive processes. I am simply integrating. This is a significant data input. It is, but positive stimuli often are." He pulled me closer. "Sleep, Bella. We will resolve the variables in the morning." The subsequent weeks established a new baseline. I primarily worked from the villa studio, where the environment fostered a creative output dormant for years. My hotel proposal was greenlit. Consequently, I secured my first major client in over a year. Pablo Santoro contracted me for his hotel rebrand, and this association generated 2 additional client leads. Carlo and I spent most evenings in cohabitation. We developed a functional domestic routine, preparing meals, working in shared spaces, and debriefing on our respective days. He educated me on enology and introduced me to his preferred establishments. I, in turn, educated him on design theory and compelled his attendance at art exhibitions he would otherwise ignore. His family unit was a separate variable. Meeting his brothers proved intimidating. Luca and Marco Ferretti were as physically imposing as Carlo, though with less social polish. They maintained a cautious civility, clearly withholding judgment pending my longevity in the relationship. His mother was a more significant obstacle. Maria Ferretti communicated non-verbally that she had anticipated a daughter-in-law from a family of comparable status and influence. I was a deviation from her expectations, a fact she conveyed through polite but clear signals. Following one notably tense Sunday lunch, Carlo stated, allow for an adjustment period. She will acclimate once our seriousness is established. And if she does not, then she does not. My choice of partner is not contingent upon maternal approval. I am 33 years old. I will make my own determinations. Despite this, I observed the stress it induced in him, his attempt to reconcile his mother's expectations with his own agenda. It was a further data point indicating that partnership with Carlo meant entering a complex system with protocols I did not fully grasp. One evening, approximately 6 weeks after the initial confrontation over the parking space, Carlo returned to the villa, exhibiting an unusually grave demeanor. I was in the studio, finalizing designs for Paolo's hotel, and I registered the anomaly immediately. He stated, "We must confer." A sense of dread materialized in my stomach. "Those 3 words are never a positive indicator," I inquired, placing my stylus down. "What has transpired?" "Nothing negative, merely a decision requiring joint consensus." He sat opposite me. "I am experiencing pressure from business associates to formalize our relationship, to announce an engagement." My cardiovascular system ceased function. "Engaged? Carlo, our association is only 6 weeks in duration. I am aware, and this is not a proposal. Not at this time, not in this manner. But within my sphere of influence, serious relationships are codified by formal commitments. Our sustained association, absent any public declaration, is provoking inquiry, causing speculation as to its legitimacy versus it being a transient affair. So, what is your request? I am requesting your willingness to wear a ring, not an engagement ring per se, but an object signifying commitment, a promise ring, in essence, a symbol to communicate to my world that you are claimed and my intentions are serious." He retrieved a small velvet box from his pocket. "I commissioned this for you. There is no coercion. If the timing is premature, we will devise an alternative solution." He opened the box, revealing an exquisite ring, minimalist yet elegant. A single diamond in a white gold setting. It was not ostentatious, but its value and significance were clear. My response was quiet. "It is beautiful. It is a choice. You can decline. I will accept that." But a positive response signifies a public commitment to this dynamic. No more concealment, no more ambiguity regarding our status. His intense gaze locked with mine. "I desire your acceptance. I want the world to recognize you as mine, but only if that aligns with your own volition." 6 weeks prior, I was in a dispute with a stranger over a parking space. Now that same man was presenting me with a symbol of his claim, a man who had become integral to my existence in ways I could not have foreseen. The acceleration was extreme. The intensity was overwhelming. The situation was untenable. It was also precisely what I desired. I stated, my voice stable despite my accelerated heart rate. "Yes, I will wear your ring. I will be yours publicly. I choose this. I choose you." The smile that manifested on Carlo's face seemed to justify every risk I was undertaking. He slid the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit, as he had, of course, surreptitiously obtained my measurements. He drew me into an embrace. He promised against my hair, "You will not regret this. I will ensure it." "You consistently make that assertion," I said, but I was smiling. "At some point, you will be required to provide proof. I will devote the remainder of my life to proving it if necessary." He pulled back to look at me, his expression intense. "I know this is accelerated. I know it is irrational, but I have never possessed more certainty about anything. You are the terminal point for me, Adriana. The authentic article, the individual with whom I intend to construct a life. You are pathological, I stated, but I was kissing him, the ring glinting as I ran my hands through his hair. Completely pathological, he concurred between kisses. But you remain. You are wearing my symbol of ownership. You are choosing this life with me. So, what does that indicate about your own psychological state? As pathological as your own? Perhaps more so. Perfect. We will engage in this shared psychosis. Later that night, in bed with Carlo's arms around me and the ring on my finger reflecting moonlight, I processed the trajectory that led me to this point. From a dispute over a parking space to wearing a promise ring from one of Naples' most powerful figures, from solitary struggle to building a thriving business with support previously unimaginable, it was accelerated. The subject's later reflection reveals a complete rationalization of her high-risk behavior, reframing it as a positive life event. The perpetrator, Carlo, then verbally reinforced the initial defiant act, conditioning her to associate her value with the very behavior that first drew his predatory attention. He initiated physical contact while delivering praise, claiming the brief, 5-minute conflict had profoundly altered his life. Her attempt to downplay the event was immediately countered. He reframed her mundane action as a profound act of self-assertion, assigning a grander meaning to their origin dynamic. He increased physical pressure, linking this action to his stated catalyst for emotional attachment, her unwavering defiance. The subject then vocalized an unplanned declaration of love, a classic symptom of trauma bonding. The perpetrator's physiological response was to become motionless, processing his successful manipulation. He then asserted physical dominance, positioning her in a vulnerable state, while his gaze produced a physiological stress response. He commanded a repetition of her declaration. He reciprocated, framing his affection with adjectives confirming his own aberrant nature, again linking his obsession to her initial insubordination. The subject's temporal assessment, 6 weeks prior, contrasts a trivial dispute with her current high-stakes entanglement. She interprets his targeting of her insecurities as validation and his prevention of her escape as commitment. The initial conflict is now fully romanticized as a positive, formative event.